look at a tree like this, the big question is, um, what do I do next? People will walk up to a tree because they've heard that you need to prune your fruit trees, and that might or might not be true. So it's always good to take a moment and to just really look at your tree. Good to know what kind of tree it is, how it responds to pruning. But the most important thing is to ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve? And there are better or not so good reasons to prune a tree. The best reason to prune a tree is to protect the health of a tree, because you have a pretty big investment in a tree, in money, in time, in garden space. And orchardists prune a little bit differently because their whole system and their whole techniques are different. They replace their trees more often, which the average homeowner doesn't want to do. They might use more sprays. In most fruit is actually not grown organically, unfortunately, so they might use more sprays to compensate for it. But when you're doing your own backyard tree, first and foremost, if you want to preserve the tree, should be your goal should be to preserve the health of the tree. The second good reason is to keep the tree from being damaged. So if you have a tree that is, say, a pathway maybe where people are going by isn't so bad, but if you had a tree where the branches were hanging over, where a truck might go through and actually break the branch off, you're better off to actually prune that branch off so that it's a controlled cut rather than having it randomly break when this truck goes by and breaks it. So in some cases, foot traffic also, if it's an eye poker, you're better off, the person who knows what they're doing, is better off pruning it so that someone just doesn't snap it off midway. The other thing is part of the health of the tree is to maintain some sort of good shape for the tree. And most trees will actually do this on their own. So really a minimum of pruning is your best pruning. If a tree has never been pruned, it will probably grow into a beautiful tree. Unfortunately, what happens is sometimes we as humans want different things from our trees, like fruit trees. We want to get maximum amount of fruit from them. And so sometimes we do slightly sacrifice the health of the tree in order to achieve something like more fruit. So no pruning is always best. You'll probably, if the soil is good, a tree is kept well watered, you have good pollination, which is difficult in really rainy areas. But if you have all the conditions that are good, you probably won't have to prune a tree and you'll still get some fruit from it. If the tree is growing in a less than optimum condition, which many of our trees are, then it's going to probably need some pruning. For one, a tree's top will mimic its roots. So if there is, say, some place that the roots can't grow in one direction, that part of the tree might become stunted, so it will throw it off balance so that the other part of the tree gets overwhelmed and then the tree is unbalanced. The other thing that can happen is that quite often trees are just sort of topped at the nursery right away, and so once they're topped, once they're pruned, they always have to be pruned. So if you have a tree that's ever been pruned before, you will have to continue to prune it. The other thing that's for your fruit production is you want these branches to be spaced out enough that all the branches get a certain amount of light. And sometimes some of these things can be accomplished instead of pruning with a certain amount of training. Think bonsais that used to wrap copper wire along a branch to shape it a certain way. but you don't have to get that fancy, and if you do wrap them too much, you have to watch that the bark doesn't wear. But a simple weight will keep this branch down low where it would have gone up high. Lots of people want to prune a tree to keep it short, to pick the fruit better. That is really not a great reason to prune your trees. You're better off, if you can, to choose trees that are already dwarf or semi-dwarf so that they stay low just by the effect that the rootstock has on the top of the tree. If you're inheriting a tree that already is a big tree, I personally recommend getting either a fruit picker on the end of a long pole or getting a tall orchard ladder and just leave the tree alone without topping it. Topping it always results in a slow death of the tree. Saying that, lots of trees have been topped, and I have seen trees that look to me like they should be dead, and they're still producing lots of fruit. So there's hardly ever a lost cause. Once in a while you'll see it, but hardly ever. The other thing, when we talked about pruning to prevent damage to a tree, if you have a situation where these branches start to rub on one another, and here's a great example, if you can get in here to see where this branch, this one branch, was rubbing on this branch here. And you can see how it just wore off the bark. And so it's just like, the bark is just like our skin, where if the skin is intact, we're less likely to get an infection. If the skin is broken, we're more likely to get an infection. And it's the same with trees. Disease organisms can very easily colonize that nice juicy area right underneath the bark that's got lots of water and lots of nutrients. And so that's where disease organisms can get established. So you want to prune the tree to prevent the rubbing of these two branches. So along with that goes anything that's already headed in the wrong direction. So you might have a branch that's not rubbing yet, but the sooner you get it, the younger it is when you remove it, the less stress it is on the tree. And we all know stress, whether it's an animal, vegetable, or human, stress will be a problem. So we don't want to stress the tree more than we have to. So the sooner we can remove a small branch that might end up being in trouble, the better off we are.